Well, hello. I know I'm between you and lunch, so I'll get this lightning talk lightning fast. Welcome to Beyond Good Enough, why we want an OTel API and SDK for Kotlin, and what we're going to do about it. So who is this we I'm talking about? Well, I'm part of the we, so I'll speak for us. I am Hanson. I work for Embrace. We're a user-focused observability platform for the client. And we're built on OpenTelemetry first. And as a result, I am also an approver in the OpenTelemetry Android project. The larger group of folks I'm speaking for, obviously, are Kotlin developers. And in 2025, really, Android developers are all Kotlin developers in some respect. And those of us who want to use OpenTelemetry can use OpenTelemetry thanks to the fact that we can run Java on Android. And you do that like you would for other applications, which is simply use a Java SDK directly. Now, there are problems with that if you just deployed it, because on mobile, there's a bunch of issues that you have to deal with in terms of reliability, in terms of getting your data back successfully all the time. And also, there's just a ton of instrumentation available out there for you to grab off the shelf. So most folks who use OpenTelemetry on Android use a package that is an agent that wraps a bunch of bespoke instrumentation and wrappers around the platform APIs in order to drop in the SDK and have it record data without a ton of work. So the OpenTelemetry Android project does that. A lot of people upstream that or use that as an upstream. And then there's also the SDK I work on, which is the Embrace Android SDK, which also exposes OpenTelemetry APIs and uses OpenTelemetry Java internally. So we have some code written in Kotlin, but using the OpenTelemetry Java core, as it were. Sounds great. Sounds like we have this solved. Drop the package in, and you're good to go. What's the problem? Well, working is a bit of a spectrum. There is compiles and logs a thing successfully, and then there is fitting like a glove. And Android is kind of more on the former side. Because if you give the SDK to an Android developer, the first thing they'll notice is the fact that it's in Java. Well, Javaness may be the first thing they notice because they're not used to singing anymore in 2025. But really, Javaness isn't their biggest problem. Once you dig in, the Javaness is actually kind of okay. Well, what are the problems then? Why am I standing up here saying, hey, I want something different? Well, let's go 1 to 5 or 4. First is that some Kotlin use cases simply can't use Java. Kotlin Multiple Platform requires 100% Kotlin, 100% Kotlin native. And if you don't know what Kotlin Multiple Platform is, it's something that you can write cross-application or cross-platform application code that runs in Kotlin on various platforms like Android, iOS, desktop, web. And on top of that, whoa, what the heck did I do? There we go. On top of that, you add Compose Multi-Platform, CMP, and it gives you a full-fledged cross-platform application development framework, similar to Flutter or React Native. Now, CMP has a lot of competition out there, the aforementioned React Native and Flutter being two of them. But KMP itself, the core modules you could write in Kotlin and working in all the various OSs, that is the future of Kotlin and Android, and not because somebody decreed. Developers love it and use it. Most of the open source SDKs developers and maintainers out there leverage KMP in other works. Folks like who work at Square and Uber do, and obviously platform support is important. JetBrains and Google both say this is the future. You write this once, works for Android with basically zero, well, a little bit, very little overhead, but you can also use it in iOS. And for things that are platform agnostic logic, it's very attractive for those who have apps on various platforms. So the lack of KMP support is a growing concern because an emerging platform that you can't use OTel natively in, that is a problem. Second is that there's no canonical concept of current on mobile. The use of the scope object and current span to pull up a parent is prevalent in the Java API and SDK. But on mobile, independent workflows run concurrently. And what you're doing, what you want to look at and want to trace may not be what's just happening on the process itself. You want to observe the user doing something while something is happening concurrently in the background, kicked off by a background job. Those aren't related. And if you try to derive context by looking at a current on a thread, you're going to get in trouble. So if you use it, non-trivial traces that rely on it become brittle. And you have to manage contexts and parents explicitly, similar to how the JavaScript SDK does. And the Android SDK, you have to be super careful. But it's right there in the API, and it's used by instrumentation. So it's a landmine if you don't watch out for it. Third is that there's no support for fragile runtime environments that you experience on mobile, on the SDK level. Unstable network connections can create back pressure you don't expect at really odd times. And you have to deal with it outside the SDK. A process could suddenly die without you knowing about it. So what are you going to do with telemetry that's in the process of being recorded or has been recorded but not sent? Somebody has to deal with it. And also the overhead of simply running a processor and an exporter synchronously on the calling thread could potentially be expensive. And on mobile devices, a couple milliseconds here and there is a dropped frame. It's something visible to a user. All this can probably be handled outside the SDK without another implementation, frankly. And that's what the OpenTelemetry Android package does. That's what the Embrace SDK does. But sometimes we have to jump through hoops and do things that we may not exactly want to do. And it feels like a core functionality of an SDK if it is supposed to work on mobile. And then there are what I call paper cuts, which are these tiny little things that by themselves don't mean a whole lot, but in totality create a set of potholes that just make things not pleasant. Things like having obfuscation, screw up reflection, not being able to use environment variable configuration because, well, it doesn't exist on mobile at runtime. Even the API guarantees. Adding a annotation, a null annotation, changes what the API is on Kotlin, but not in Java. It adds up to the vibes not being great. All these things that you trip over, that you can get to work, but it just causes extra friction. It just makes it like it isn't made for us to use on Android. And spoiler alert, it wasn't made for us. It just happens to work because Android can use Java. So what are we going to do about it? Let me define who we is again at this point. At this point, we doing something about this right now is just the 3 people at Embrace on Android doing this. But hopefully that is just for now because we're in the experimental stage. In the future, we want this to be out in the community and have other people contribute to it. But you got to start somewhere. And starting somewhere is creating a Kotlin API. So an idiomatic shim around all the Java stuff that provides transparent wrappers for the Java ecosystem. So you ask for a tracer, you get a span. It looks like Kotlin. The interface is Kotlin. But under the hood, it's just all the Java implementation. Right now, we have that, a version of it, out in OpenTelemetry, Kotlin, in the Embrace repo. We are going to productionize it soon internally, just so that we can make sure that it actually works before we get people on board and trying to donate and everything. But that's the end goal, is to quickly get this up to snuff and have it donated and be in the community. Basically have a landing spot for folks who are on Android, who want Kotlin, and come and say, here you go, here's an API that's idiomatic for you. And we can stop there. There's utility here, just having an API, just having some smoothness around what is a bit prickly. However, it doesn't solve all the problems I listed above, which is kind of what we want. So we're going to go and create a Kotlin SDK. I know, I know. I know what you're thinking. I like writing this much code as much as you do, in the sense that I don't. But we need a mobile-first foundation now that is built into the SDK. And we want and need Kotlin native support in the future. And this is probably the main driving factor. It's got to work in KNP in a non-tricky, non-complex way. And I don't know how to do that with just a Java SDK. So is this a rewrite? Sort of. I mean, on Android, you're replacing a working implementation with another one. That's a rewrite. But if you're doing KNP, you had nothing before. So for them, it's not a rewrite. Well, does it have to be? Maybe, maybe not. But either way, significant complexity will be incurred. And it's where you want to incur that complexity. You want to build it in the Java SDK? You want to build it as accompaniments to the Java SDK? You can do that, maybe. But you're not getting away from this. And it'll only get worse as the runtimes on mobile require different things, and the backend Java implementations require different things. The least complicated path is Kotlin native SDK, because it doesn't impact the Java ecosystem. And this sort of rewrite don't have to be complex or don't have to suck. We're already doing it incrementally by first creating an API and wrapping in the entirety of the Java SDK. We don't need to implement the whole spec. What if we just did tracing? And if you want to use metrics or whatever, use the Java SDK with all the warts and all. And we can always change course. We don't have to, we're not locked in here. If it doesn't work, if it's too complex, we bail. It's possible. But there's utility of having a place of one's own. To expand the Kotlin and OTel community, we want something that we don't have to be beholden to anybody else. We just do it for ourselves. Backend first Java ecosystems work great for the use cases designed for it. Mobile first Kotlin ecosystem can be a good alternative and an accompaniment to what exists for the use cases, for the apps that want what this provides. So to summarize, we want Kotlin native support, we want a mobile first design, we want idiomatic APIs for Kotlin. And to get beyond good enough, I think the simplest way, the least complex way, is having an OTel API and SDK of our own. Thank you.